Hi everybody and welcome back to my channel. I'm Lysha from Lysha Be Creative and we are back yet again with another spooky themed tutorial. We're going to be creating this sort of gothic skeleton kind of grunge style tumbler that I'm really in love with right now, and I was inspired by this vinyl that I grabbed yet again from Vinyl Gallery. I promise you she does not disappoint with her amazing vinyl patterns, so I encourage you to check her out. And I'm even going to show you a little bit of a mistake that I made throughout today's tutorial and how sometimes these things happen in the creative process and what are some options that you can do when it comes to correcting those mistakes throughout the tumbler tutorial process. So of course, everything I use in today's tutorial will be listed and linked down in the description below, as well as some brand new digital files that I have just launched on my shop. So I encourage you to check that out as well, so you can grab up this SVG that I use for today's tutorial, which will also be linked down in the description box, as well as all of the links to my social media and of course my Facebook group, Lysha Be Creative Community. So I feel like I've done more than enough talking for this intro, so let's just go ahead and get into today's tutorial. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So I am starting with a 32-ounce plump that I've already spray painted with a flat black spray paint. I've done one coat of spray paint here, and so now I'm going to put lines of painter's tape on this cup, sort of one right after the other until I get to the other side of the cup. So with these stripes, I know that with this particular cup that my 1-inch painter's tape is not going to evenly go around the cup. So I will have one section that will be just smaller than my 1-inch painter's tape. So instead of trying to kind of make smaller tape sections or cut something out of vinyl so everything's even, I'm going to use that almost 2 painter's tape section as sort of my focal point of the tumbler. So of course I'm not going to sit here and make you watch me line up all the tape. You just line it up edge to edge and go all the way around until you get to the other side of the tumbler. But I am going to speed that process up here, and we're then going to be removing every other piece of tape with the exception of 2 sections where I'll keep 2 horizontal lines or vertical lines right next to each other. And then I'm going to take this and I'm going to spray paint the sections that are open with a flat white spray paint. With my paint now dry, I can go ahead and very carefully remove my painter's tape lines. Be super careful. You obviously don't want to chip the paint underneath, otherwise you'd have to go in and try and touch that up. But I'm going to remove this, and then what we're going to be doing next is we're going to be using the smoke method to get a little bit of a smoky look on this tumbler. So this is something I haven't yet showed on my channel, and I actually used to love doing this. These are perfect for making like cups for men, because obviously they don't typically gravitate towards glitter. So I love doing smoke tumblers under tattoos, those kinds of things, or doing it for a guy style cup because it always comes out really cool. So what I'm doing here is I just have a candle, doesn't matter what brand, you can get a candle from the dollar store, wherever. And I have a fork, and the fork is going to help me create the smoke. So I literally put my metal fork right into the fire, or right into the lit candle, and that is then going to create this sort of billow of dark black smoke. I then just kind of move my tumbler back and forth until I get the amount of smoke that I'm looking for onto each of the white sections. And again, this isn't doing anything to my painted black sections because it's black spray paint, so you're not going to be able to see the smoke method on any of those sections. But ideally, I'm focusing on those white strips there. That way I can get sort of this beautiful smoky look, which I think will just kind of continue to enhance sort of the aesthetic, if you will, of this sort of Skulls Gothic tumbler design. So I'm going to finish that, and don't forget to get your bottom as well if you're keeping that white. I'm going to make sure I get enough sort of a smoke method on here. With my smoke tumblers, I don't ever spray seal them, but I do know sometimes people will go in with like a clear spray paint to seal them. I don't ever do that. Just be careful because the soot from the smoke on the tumbler can rub off on your hands, and you don't want to smear all of the work that you've done. So now that I'm finished with this, I am then going to just let this sit so I can prep the next couple things, but I will put this on the turner for 1 coat of epoxy. I am going to take a risk and just do 1 coat of epoxy here, and I'm going to add a little bit of moon dust to this, so while that is all happening, I'll be able to get my design work together. So my one coat epoxy is cured and it is sparkly goodness. So I am going to just sand the top rim. And the reason why I'm sanding the top rim is because we're going to be applying our Skulls vinyl to this. And I do want to make sure that I am not going past this stainless steel line to not give me sort of more work and hassle when it comes to the next section of sanding, which I will do after the next subsequent coats of my epoxy. So we're going to use this absolutely beautiful transparent Skulls vinyl that I got from Vinyl Gallery. I will link it down in the description box as well as a discount code that you can use, and I'm going to cut sort of sections that are going to fit over the white smokied section. So it's a little bit more than an inch. It's about about an inch and a half, I would say. So I'm just going to use a piece of transfer tape because it has the grid lines on here to help me measure the first strip, and then I'll use that to kind of measure out the other 3 strips that I'm going to add to this tumbler. So I'm going to get these all cut and then we're going to get them applied. So this transparent vinyl was perfect for this design, and this was one of those designs that I kind of just thought of in one of my sort of sleep stupors, if you will. I tend to have a lot of design ideas come to my brain when I'm either trying to go to sleep or extremely tired, and this is definitely one of those designs. I happened to be looking at this vinyl earlier in the week and I was like, I would love to use this vinyl, but I didn't know how I wanted to incorporate it. And before the end of the night, as soon as I'm laying in bed trying to like get some rest for the next day, bam, I think of an idea, and of course I have to execute it. So now that all my vinyl lines are cut, I'm going to be using the transparent vinyl to apply these strips right onto that smoky section. So again, I do only have 1 coat of epoxy on here, so I do want to be rather careful to make sure that I don't do a lot of pulling up of this vinyl, because this really could pull up my epoxy layer as well because it's such a thin coat of epoxy on my cup. But I'm going to take the risk because I'm pretty confident that I can get these strips of vinyl on without having to do a lot of maneuvering. So you're going to just apply the strips kind of like you would a full vinyl wrap. I like to start with one edge and then kind of smooth it until I get to the other edge. And then as I'm going along, I'll cut the top and bottom edges, as well as make sure that I cut all of the bubbles that may have appeared in the vinyl with just putting a little kind of poked hole in there with my craft knife and making sure that I have a nice smooth vinyl application of these 3 sections. So now that this is finished, what I'm literally going to do now is this needs to go back on the turner for another coat of epoxy to get this all sealed in. So while that's curing, let's go into Cricut Design Space and get our decals cut. So now in Cricut Design Space, I am going to upload a couple of images that I've already purchased from Creative Fabrica. I used these in my Spooky Squad Kids Tumbler tutorial that I did a few weeks ago. So I'm just going to upload and put on my canvas a couple of these spider web images here. And then I'm just going to kind of play with the sizing here. So I end up making sure to measure the large section of the tumbler that's going to be the focal point, if you will. And so now I'm just putting a shape into Cricut Design Space to kind of act as the canvas for that section that I'm going to be applying the spider webs to. So originally I thought that I was going to do multiple spider webs and just do them down the line of this section, but I didn't really like how it looked. It looked very cheesy to me. It just didn't look natural in the way that I wanted it to. So I end up deciding to make the spider webs oversized. Oversized in the sense of making sure that only half of the spider web really came into that section that is going to be that black vinyl section that we're going to apply this spider web section to. And so I wanted to make sure that where the ends of the spider web vinyl met, that either it got completely cut off by that section, or I was connecting 2 of the spider webs together at the end to kind of create like a fluidity of the spider webs interchanging or intermingling throughout that section. So it'll make a lot more sense once I put it together on the tumbler, but that was kind of my thought process and mindset when going into this after I kind of looked at having the smaller spider webs and wasn't really thrilled with how they were coming out. So I'm just going to cut these on regular white vinyl, and now let's get them applied. So I've already weeded the spider webs here, and so we're going to start with this kind of right angled spider web here, and this is going to go towards the top edge of that section that I have open. That's just sort of that black strip of spray paint with that glitter additive. So I'm going to start with this, and I'm going to start towards the top section. I'm making sure not to cover up the seam where the vinyl in this section meet. I'm actually going more to the right of that, and the reason for that is I know I'm going to be covering up those sections with vinyl, and I still want to make sure you can see the edge of that spider web. So I'm going to peel off the transfer tape here, and then anything that overlaps into the next section, I'm just going to take my craft knife and snip those sections and get those removed. Since we don't want them into the other sections, we're strictly trying to just decorate or add decal to this middle section here. So for the next section, I'm going to take this larger piece of spiderweb, this extremely large spiderweb here, and I'm going to end up cutting it in half to be able to use it in a couple of places on the cup. So I want the spider webs to go all the way down the length of the cup, and so I'm trying not to leave any open gaps whatsoever. So I'm going to start first by figuring out where I can connect one edge of the spider web that's going to show on the tumbler, and making sure it connects, if you will, to the spider web above it. So now I'm just going to cut the excess here because I was going to have a huge overlap, but I know I'll be able to use a small section of that towards the bottom where I still have a lot of blank space there. So remove that section, and then doing exactly what I did before, I'll just take my craft knife and I will just trim up anything that goes over the edge of where the two sections meet there. Just remove those pieces there before I go back in with this final section of excess spiderweb vinyl that we're going to be using towards the bottom. So there was a little bit of a gap here at the bottom, and I'm just going to take again one piece of this spider web and just make sure to connect it, if you will, to the spider web above it, because the idea here is I want it to look organic. I want it to look like all of these spider webs are sort of intermingled and connected so that it gives more of a true spider web look. And yeah, so then I'm just going to remove this section, clean up any of the excess vinyl that overlaps, and then that is it. So once I'm done with this, I am going to again put this back on the turner for now, the third coat of epoxy here. I'm not going to add anything to this yet, but we're going to do one more coat of epoxy before we do our vinyl lines that separate all the sections, and then we can get into the other pieces of this tutorial. And we're back to sanding. So at this point, I now have about 3 coats of epoxy on my cup, and so I'm going to sand the top and bottom rim here, and then of course get this all cleaned off with a little bit of 91% rubbing alcohol. So I did, after cleaning this, go inside and use my Cricut to just cut vinyl strips. I will put the measurements that I always use down in the description box, and so I'm going to cover the sections with this spider vinyl that I got from Zindy's. And I'm going to just use those vinyl strips I cut out of this vinyl to cover up the seams in between each section. So once I'm done with that, I obviously will trim up the edges here and then get it onto what will be its 4th coat of epoxy, and then we will be moving on to the drip portion of this tumbler, which is where things went a little bit haywire. Alright, so we're going to do another drip on this tumbler, similar to what I did in my last tutorial, but since that didn't record, this is the perfect time to show you exactly what I meant in that tutorial. So we're going to take just some metallic fabric paint that I grabbed from the craft store, and I've grabbed 2 glitters. I have Basic Blackboard, which is the black from Peachy Olive glitter, and Solomon, which is another kind of metallic silver colored glitter that we're going to be using. So you take your fabric paint and you literally just make a paint line as thick or as thin as you want it along that top edge. I'm being careful here not to make sure I get anything on the top lip of the tumbler, because that will just mean I'll have to do a little bit more sanding after the fabric paint has dried. But I'm going in and I'm just going to go around a couple of times because I like to start with kind of a thin line and then go thicker in some sections. And going thicker in some sections is what is going to give you longer drips and more of a drippy look. So this is something that I find is the easiest drip method to do. I know not everybody likes to do drips this way. Some people like to use kind of thickened epoxy. I've done both. This is perfect for doing glitter drips. So I like to do epoxy drips when I want sort of that really fluffy look. I love doing fabric paint drips when I want to be able to incorporate glitter to the drip. So I'm going to look at what I have so far after tapping the bottom of my cup to get all that paint to flow downward. And I decided I wanted this drip to go a little bit farther down. So I'm going to go right back around that top rim again with another line of the fabric paint. Again, as thick or as thin as you would like. Obviously, the thicker that you do it, the longer and farther your drips are going to go down. So just make sure that you have enough space and that you are, kind of satisfied with how far down you want your drips to go. So again, tapping that bottom to get all that paint to start to migrate downward in that drip motion. And at this point, I'm pretty satisfied with it. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to be adding the glitter. So I'm going to create a little bit of an ombre here with my two colors. So starting with basic blackboard, I'm going to go around sort of the actual drips of this fabric paint. And I'm going to just go around the entire tumbler, and I'm going to start to very gently ombre upward into what will be the Solomon portion or the silver portion of the fabric paint drip here. So to create like a nice blend of gray to black. So once I'm satisfied with basic blackboard and the ombre that I have towards the bottom of this cup, I'll clean up my mess here, and then I'll move into doing the same exact thing with Solomon. So I'm going to pick up my glitter here, and then we're going to go in with Solomon, which is this metallic sort of silver color that I have. It's actually the first time I've used this, and it's actually a very pretty glitter. It's a glitter that if you look at it in the bottle, you can't tell if it's a light gold or if it's silver. So it really depends on what base you apply it to. Since I'm applying it to a gray base, you can definitely see it leans more towards that silver metallic. But if I was to choose a more yellow or more golden base, it definitely would give more reflection of sort of that gold color that it has. So I'm pretty satisfied with that. And at this point, I would have just told you to let that dry. Don't do any cleaning of the glitter, and then glitter or remove the glitter the next day. So this is where things went wrong. So unfortunately, in my last coat of epoxy, I did not wait the full 24 hours that my KS Resin Liquidy split requires to be fully cured. So my top layer was just slightly tacky enough to make the glitter really stick to in between the sections of the drip. So unfortunately, this isn't a super clean drip as I'm used to getting. And so it was a little bit discouraging and sort of like disappointing to see, but let's see what we can do with this and to try and cover up this mistake that I've made. But something to definitely be mindful of when you're doing these kinds of drips, because you can't go in and clean up those sections right after, because you'll end up messing up your actual fabric paint. It is something to keep in mind as to when you do the drip as far in your process of the tumbler tutorial process. So now I am just going to apply this decal, which I created. It's available in my digital shop on Etsy. And this is a Spooky Babe decal that I cut out of a holographic vinyl that I had on hand. I'll also link that, which I got from Vinyl Gallery, down in the description box. So I'll be honest, at this point in the tumbler tutorial process, I'm a little bit discouraged with how my drip came out. And so while I'm trying to figure out how I am going to kind of fix my mistake or sort of make the mistake that I've made part of the tumbler and its final look, I decided I'm going to add a little bit of jazzing up to the dark black sections that only have fine mica glitter. So I did kind of settle with knowing that that drip was just going to have to stay as is. So what you see me doing is I've taken it aside and I've gone to spray seal that with a clear gloss spray paint. So I did try my hardest, my absolute hardest, to get all of that glitter out from in between those sections. I tried anything and everything you can think of, and that glitter was pretty stuck on there, so I knew I was going to just kind of have to live with it. So in the meantime, I'm going to take this glitter, which is called Spidey Sense from Glitter Makes It, and it is literally tiny holographic spiders that we're going to be adding with a little bit of Mod Podge to these strips of black paint that we have along this tumbler. So I'm just going to take a brush and just a little bit of Mod Podge here, a nice thin coat here. You could also use a glue stick, which you guys saw me use in my last tutorial to kind of adhere some of these little holographic pieces, but I'm just going to use a little bit of Mod Podge here since I have to wait for the clear gloss spray paint to dry anyway, and I'm going to just apply these little spiders with a pair of tweezers, and then eventually you'll see me use my fingers because it seemed to be sticking to my hands way better than I could get them picked up with these tweezers. So I'm just going to apply these to the tumbler as I'm trying to figure out what is going to be the best way to be able to cover up this mistake or make it part of this aesthetic. So this is the part where I'm going to tell you that creating tumblers is a process, and I'm someone who is not perfect, right? And none of us are. And so it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay for things not to go exactly as planned. And I have said that in far too many tutorials. And I want you guys not to be so hard on yourself when it comes to creating your crafts. Crafting is meant to be fun, right? It's not meant to be stressful. It's not meant to frustrate you or disappoint you. And I think that in every process and every tumbler that I create, there's always a lesson learned at the end of it. And this is certainly one of those things where it is a lesson learned that hopefully I won't make for the next time, but I also am going to do my hardest to be able to see through this tumbler process to see what I can do to sort of change the aesthetic of this tumbler. So that is just kind of my thought process when I make a mistake in the tumbler process. Yes, I could simply give up and decide to strip the cup altogether, but at the same time, there's no learning out of that if I just strip the tumbler and start over. So this really stretches your creative ability when you make those mistakes because it forces you to have to sort of pivot and change directions. So this is just a quick look of the tumbler on the turner. I added a couple more glitters to kind of blend in a little bit of those mistakes in between. So I added both smog and caviar, chunkier glitters from Peachy Olive Glitter, which I will post a picture of right here and link in the description box. And then by the end of this, I kind of had decided that if I want my drip to stand out, what a better way than to add a little bit of some acrylic paint. So I did that, and honestly, I am a little bit more satisfied with how this came out. I hope that you guys enjoyed today's tutorial, and I hope that you learned a little bit about being motivated and staying true to seeing the process through when it comes to making your tumblers. So again, I hope that you guys enjoyed today's tutorial. If you did, of course, give this video a huge thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you guys again in the next one. Bye!